Thank you for listening to Liberty Christian Center's podcast. Let's join Pastor Paul Carlson for today's message.
Amen. Well, we're in a series, we call it Red Letter. I always like Red Letter. The whole Bible's good. There's meatier parts of the Bible more than others. Did you know that? You know, as a new believer, we've always instructed people to start reading in the Gospels. Usually we say start in John. Why is that? Because usually when they start in Leviticus, I get a lot of phone calls. So it's just good, and it's good, it's palatable. As you read the Gospels and you see Jesus' life unfolding before you, how can I say this? I mean, Jesus is the Son of God. He is, the King. But see yourself doing the things that He did. Do you hear me? This is totally in line with what Jesus told us. He said, the things that I'm doing will you do, and even greater. You see, the problem is sometimes people read about the things that Jesus did, and they go into this la-la state of, well, yeah, that was the Son of God. You're right. It was. And He came to show us how He wanted us to live. Wow, that blows my mind. So see yourself doing the works of Jesus. Is that simple? It's so cool. What you see Him doing, He'll lead you. He'll guide you. Just learn to hear His voice. There's a guy, his name was, I'm looking for it here, Louis Klopsch. I'm going to have to do a Google thing and see if I'm saying that name right. Klopsch. Just sounds, what is that, German maybe? I don't know. Anyway, he lived, back in 1852 to 1910, and it was right in 1899 that he had this revelation. And what it was is he was reading the book of Luke, and he was reading about the Lord's Supper, and it was at the part where Jesus said, take this cup, it's my blood in the New Testament. And when he read that, he had this revelation. He said, what if we took and printed a Bible where every word that Jesus spoke was in red? Kind of going along with the blood and everything. And he had this mentor that was there, and he threw it at him, and he says, yeah, let's do it. Little did they know it would catch on, and even today, it's a very common thing to pick up a red letter Bible. And the advantage is it just makes it easy to see words that Jesus said. In some Bibles, they don't even have quotation marks as they translate it, so it makes it just stand out and jump out at you. For years, I've said this, Jesus' words, it's the hot sauce of the Word. It's the red letter, it's the hot sauce. And how many like a little hot sauce on their taco? I mean, I'm a taco king. I mean, I make tacos every week for me. And I always throw on a little hot sauce. Tell you, it adds spice to your life. So, we're going to talk a little bit about some Jesus words today. And really, this could be a very short message today. I've only got 2 words that Jesus said. And they're basically this, salt and light. And there's a portion of Scripture that we're going to read, but that's what Jesus was talking about, is salt and light. And we're taking this out of Matthew 5. And what you may want to know about Matthew 5 is it's an excerpt from the Sermon on the Mount. And I'll tell you this, the Sermon on the Mount stretches from Matthew 5 through Matthew 7. And it is the longest recorded sermon we have of Jesus. Okay? And I'm telling you, you think I preach long? I really don't. I really don't. Even if we get up to 12:10 today, I preach very short, man. Paul was preaching one time so long that a guy fell asleep. Yes, in Apostle Paul's sermon, he fell asleep and he fell off the balcony and he died, and Paul just kept preaching. And when he was done, he went and raised a guy from the dead. So, hey, anyway, we don't even have a balcony. But if we did, hey, Jesus, though, I'm telling you, listen to this, Matthew 5:13 through 15. He says, you are the salt of the earth. But if the salt loses its flavor, how shall it be seasoned? It's then good for nothing, but to be thrown out and trampled underfoot by men. Ouch. Now remind me to come back to that, okay? We're going to talk about that for a minute. You're the light of the world. A city that is set on a hill cannot be hid, nor do men light a lamp and put it under a basket, but they put it on a lampstand that it'll give light to all that are in the house. So I was reading this week, and one of the things I saw is that Jesus was a new creation realities preacher. Are you familiar with that term? If you've been coming to this church for a length of time, you may recognize that that's kind of where I live, is talking about who we are in Christ. And really, this is what Jesus was doing here. He was talking about, Jesus is such a trailblazer. He was talking about this stuff even before anybody got born again. He was speaking it out in faith. He was saying, listen, guys. And he knew the crowd he had. He says, listen, you guys, you're the light of the world. I could say this about the people there. They were following Jesus. They were following him. Really, if you follow the progression of the Sermon on the Mount, it appears that in the beginning he was talking to his disciples. As the sermon goes on, the crowd gathered and got bigger, you know. And isn't that just like other stories we've read, even recently about Jesus? You know, they're trying to get away and, you know, catch a break. And all of a sudden the people heard where he's at. And all of a sudden there's a crowd there so big that the disciples are in a fret because they don't know how we're going to feed them all. And Jesus says, hey, let's feed the whole multitude here. Break out the fish and the bread and go. Crowds tended to gather where Jesus was talking. That's all I'm telling you. So Jesus was talking about new creation realities. Now, I say this term comes from 2 Corinthians 5:17. And Paul there, the Apostle Paul, was talking, and this is what he said. He said that if anyone is in Christ, they are a new creation. A new creation, a new creature. He says this, he says, old things have passed away, and behold, all things have become new. So Jesus here, he said this, he says, you are the light of the world. He said, you are salt for this world. You're salt for this world. Now, I want to start with the light thing that he talked about, and we'll come back. So, you know, how many know this? You are light. How many think of yourself like that you're light? You know, you're light in a dark world, okay? And I know that just naturally speaking, when I'm walking down the street, it looks like Paul walking down the street. But spiritually, if I were to look at it spiritually, I'm light going somewhere to happen. I'm light going somewhere to influence. Why is that? Because that's how God made you in the new birth. He made you full of light. Say, I'm light. I'm full of light. I influence those around us. Now, I like the way Jesus said it. When he said, you're light and you are salt, he didn't say, I want you to go try to be light and try to be salt. What is it about human beings? Is it just a human thing that we try to take everything and make it work? I think it's part of the curse of the fall. You know, we take things that God has done and we try to complicate it. That's where that saying comes from, making a mountain out of a molehill. You ever heard that one? You know, you see, the thing is just be you. Be you. You ever see somebody trying to be light? You ever see somebody trying to be salt? It comes off fakey. It comes off repulsive. It comes off, it pushes people away. I remember when I first got born again, I had the great honor, when I got born again, I got a job and I worked for the Billy Graham Association. And it was, I say this, it was my family. And still is, you know. I keep connected with people that I was, you know, serving with back then. And I remember we had them all in our department. But we had this one guy, he was a Bible school student. God bless him. He was so sincere and so zealous. But I'm telling you what, people kind of held him like this because everything that came out of his mouth was preaching. Everything that came out of his mouth was just like, you know, thus saith the Lord. And you know, there's a time when that's cool, but sometimes that stuff will push people away because you're not being you. And I remember this guy, he had a crash. And I was a brand new believer. You know, I didn't know nothing. I was still looked like a hippie, you know. Still had long hair, kind of, and just do my thing, coming to work, you know. And I remember this guy crashed to the point where he was falling apart, thinking that God was rejecting him and all this stuff. And somehow he came to me. I don't even, you know, isn't it funny? God will use, you know, the foolish things to confound the wise. And this is the guy, I won't say his first name, you know, just in case he's listening right now. And welcome to all the people joining us online. I don't ever want to forget those people too. I mean, they're important. But this guy, he had his first name, but everybody addressed him. They called him Brother. His name, I'll say his name was Fred. Brother Fred. You know, well, that's cool to a point. But when you're walking down Hennepin Avenue and everybody's calling you brother, I'm telling you, it's not the time to do that. Do you guys know what Hennepin Avenue is? It's like Main Street, Minneapolis. Was where we used to work. We worked on Hennepin Avenue, and I used to go out and witness on Hennepin Avenue. I was a crazy guy when I was anyway. It was good. It was great adventures, man. Fun to watch God work. But anyway, this guy had a crash and he was falling apart. He was having a mental, spiritual breakdown, and he came to me, and all I could tell him is, dude, man, you just got to get real. Got to get real. Don't try to be somebody you're not. You know, it's not cool to try to be light. It's not true to try to be salt. You got to just be light, and you got to be salt. Don't just go pour it on everywhere. So let me talk about light for a minute. John 1, verse 1 through 5. Jesus here, he's talking about Jesus. He says, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. Now, when it's talking about the Word here, it's talking about Jesus. He was in the beginning with God, and all things were made through him, and without him, nothing that was made. Okay? In him, this is where I really want to go, is verse 4. In him, in Jesus, was life, and the life was the light of men. And the light shines in the darkness, and the darkness did not comprehend it. Here's the thing. Jesus was full of something. In this particular verse, it said he was full of life. And it says that life contained in it the very light of men. And that light shined forth from Jesus into a dark world. And people didn't all comprehend it. But I'm telling you what, people are drawn to the light. So I'm talking about Jesus here, but I'm talking about you. I'm talking about what's in you. I'm talking about who you really are. You are light. You know, things get drawn to light. Have you ever sat on the back patio at night and you have a light on in Wisconsin in the summertime? What happens? Every bug in the neighborhood seems to come and join you for your little chill time. And I heard someone ask a person recently, they said, why are bugs drawn to light? And I perked up and I thought, what are they going to say? And he said, everything is drawn to light. Everything is. You think about it. If you were out in a dark field and you saw a light out in the distance, where are you going to walk? You're going to walk to the light. You're going to walk to the light. Thank God for the light. You know what? The light that's in you, it reaches out and it influences people around you. It influences people. I was talking with my older brother, as I do every Saturday morning at about 9:30, 10 o'clock. We converse. And somehow we got to talking about growing up yesterday when we were talking. And you see, my older brother is 10 years older than me, okay? And, you know, he's great. And he was, both of us, though, when we were growing up through our teen years, were very rebellious. And his rebellion looked different than my rebellion. His rebellion, he was in gangs, okay? He ran in gangs. And he would so often get into fights and things. I remember one night, I'm home alone, and he came up to our front door. And we had the kind of front door where you walked in the porch, which was always open, and you got to the main door of the house, and the whole top half was glass. And his face had just been beat, silly. And he put his face right up, pressed it against the glass to scare me as a kid. This is brother stuff. One time he drove he had a car that was pink with blue spots. Don't ask me why, but everybody knew it when he came. And one time my dad was driving my brother's car, and some guy ran up and opened the door like he was going to start a fight, and he saw it was my dad, and he said, "Oh," and he ran. It's because my dad was buff. No. It's because he thought it was my brother driving it. They called my brother, do you want to know his nickname back then? His nickname was Pumpkin. Pumpkin. All his life growing up, that's what they called him, Pumpkin. And I mean, he was rough. He got fun out of just being mean and beating people up. And I was glad he was my older brother growing up. I was rebellious in a totally different way. I won't get into my stories. You'll have to ask my brother about my stories. But I just got into drugs and all that stuff. But we were both talking yesterday, and we had this realization, which I've had before, and so has he, but we talked about it, is that it was the influence of our parents that kept us from going too far. It was the influence of our parents that kept us from stepping over whatever was a line. I mean, you might say, well, I think you crossed the line already. Well, I'll tell you what, we're here today, and we're both born again, both serving God. And with me, I got born again when I was 20. With him, he got born again when he was 50, wasn't it, Dana? 50 years old. So I tell you this to say, as a parent, don't ever underestimate the influence that you have. Don't ever underestimate the light that you are. You could have stinkers like my brother and I, but I'm telling you what, your influence makes a difference. So we're talking about light, talking about who Jesus said you are. He said this message in 1 John 1:5. Let me give you this one. This is the message we've heard from him and declare to you. God is light, and in him is no darkness at all. So when I think about God, he's nothing but light. He's nothing but light. We have a thing at our house. I should say Dana has a thing at our house. Every morning, Dana gets up, and sometimes she's so extreme, she's up standing in the middle of our yard in her bathrobe. Am I exaggerating, Dana? And she's out there watching the sunrise. And normally, on a normal day, she will take a picture of it and she'll put it up on Instagram, which I'll go over there and I'll like it. I'm supportive. So this morning, she got up, and I remember it was about 6 o'clock. She says to me, well, won't be much of a sunrise today. It's all fog. Have you looked outside? I said, I'll take your word. Give me a cup of coffee. So anyway, a little later, maybe an hour and a half later maybe, I hear Dana in the back bedroom. And Dana's so dramatic. She could be just saying the most normal thing, but it sounds like the house is on fire. It sounds like, this is really big stuff. Come on. So I hear her just yelling, and I'm on the phone. And she says, Paul, you got to come quick. And I'm thinking, man, did she burn herself? What happened, And I come running in the bedroom on the phone. Look out the window. Look at this. And there's the sun. It's just this big ball of fire. Did anybody see that this morning? It was just incredible. Even for me, it was good. And it was cutting through the fog, and you could see all the earth was just kind of frosted, and there's this big ball of fire in the sky, and there's the sun, and Dana's out there taking pictures to put up on Instagram. Yeah. But anyway, so we're drawn to the light. God is light, and in him there's no darkness at all. And when the sun is coming up in the morning, you can actually look at the sun. You can actually look at it without squinting. It's not so intense, but it's just beautiful. And the Apostle Paul, I'm not going to read this story, but in the book of Acts, what chapter is it? Verse 22, he's telling this story to King Agrippa. And he's on trial, and Festus and Bernice are there, and he's, giving the big spiel about his life, giving his testimony. And so he's sitting there, and he's telling King Agrippa about his conversion. And can I tell you this? The Apostle Paul, before he was the Apostle Paul, he was called Saul of Tarsus. And Saul of Tarsus was a name that if it was just mentioned in Christian circles, it tended to bring fear among the faint of heart. Okay? Saul of Tarsus was the modern day equivalent of a terrorist. Okay? That's who Saul was. Saul would go around and he'd bring Christians in chains to the authorities. Sometimes we find record of Saul, authorizing a stoning. Okay, where they stoned Stephen, and this is who Saul was, and people would hear his name and they'd go, no, I don't want to go talk to that guy. Oh, even Ananias, who later, after Saul was born again, Jesus appeared to Ananias and said, go to the street straight, and you're going to talk to this guy here. His name is Saul, and you're going to tell him things about the kingdom. And so Ananias heard that, and he says, hey, I don't want to go talk to Saul. Is because of the reputation that he had. But you see, Jesus is a master at taking people who were modern or old day terrorists and turning them into dynamite, explosive power for God. But here, I love what about Saul's conversion is he was minding his own business, and he's going along the road, riding a donkey, and his guys are with him, and all of a sudden, it says that right in the middle of the day, right at noontime, when sun is at its most powerful position, he says there was a light that shone from the sun that was brighter than the noonday sun. And he says, when that light shone upon me, he says, I fell from my donkey, and he said, I got on the ground, and he got born again right on the spot. Because it was an encounter with the light from heaven. It's an encounter with the light from heaven that you and I got right inside of us. It's an encounter with the light from heaven who you and I are. We are light. Can you say it? I'm light. Just give this. Ephesians 5 and 8. It says this, you were once darkness, talking to believers, and he says, but now are you light in the Lord. Walk as children of light. Walk as children of light. Wow. So anyway, Jesus again, let me read it. In Matthew 5:14, he says, you are the light of the world. A city that's set on a hill cannot be hidden. You've got to go public with who you are. The world around you is crying to know Jesus. He says, you're the light of the world. A city set on a hill cannot be hidden. Nor do they light a lamp and put it under a basket, but on a lampstand that it gives light to all that are in the house. What Jesus is talking about over and over, different ways, parables. He's given us a picture to see about ourselves, and that is this, that you're an influence. Your walk with God influences the people around you. Now, let me read over again in Matthew 5:13. He said two things that we're talking about today. He said, one, you're light, and two, you're salt. Can you say, I'm salt? I'm salt. Call me Mr. Salty. Yes. All right, so when Jesus was talking about this, everybody had this understanding about salt. What salt was in these days is it was a way to preserve food, okay? Salt was a way to preserve food because this was before they had refrigerators. They probably didn't even have a compartment with an ice cube in it to put in there and keep things fresh. No Coleman coolers and none of that kind of stuff. And so what people would do is they would salt their food, and it would prolong the life of it. You're salt, and you preserve people around you. You preserve situations. You brought into a situation, like I remember when I started this church, when Dana and I began Liberty back in the year 2000. I commuted to the cities every day, and I worked at this place where I'm pretty sure I was the only Christian in the place. And some people come and they say, oh, pray for me. I'm the only Christian in the place. Pray that I get on their job. No. No way, man. You're planted there to preserve. You're planted there to influence. Man, I loved going into my job every day where everybody around was, they're good people. Don't get me wrong. Good people, but they didn't know God. I loved it. It was like a mission field. It was like when Pastor Stephen worked at a glass factory. You'd go in there, and it was like you could be a light. And I got to say, I had a card to play. I was just honest with them. I was starting a church. So they all called me Reverend. They called me Father Paul. I didn't try to correct them. I didn't say, well, I'm really not a father. No, I didn't do that. I just say, hey, man, just be you. Just be you. God gave me influence in that place. He opened doors that I could speak to people that probably never would go to church. We had people born again. Not because I went around as a Bible, machine and quoted scriptures every word I said. Salt is good. And I'll read you a verse in a minute. It talks about seasoning things with salt. But, as good as salt is, you are not going to catch me at home taking the salt container and just eating it raw. And that's how sometimes people have used this kind of stuff. They just go out, I'm being salt. Blah, blah. That's what it makes me do. Blah. We don't want to do that. Too much salt, man, and it's not good. But I'll tell you this, Job 6:6. Let me read this. All right, come on, 2 words. We're going there today. Not too much. Job 6:6. How many have been reading this lately? Job 6. It's revelatory. Here's what he says. Now, you ready for this? You've probably been reading it. Can flavorless food be eaten without salt? This is deep. Or is there any taste in the white of an egg? Has anybody been eating egg whites lately? You can buy them in a container, just plain old egg whites. Gross. But you add some salt to it, and it's not so bad. Dana and I, we have over, we don't watch them a lot now, but we used to watch some food challenge shows. Has anybody ever watched those shows, food, there's one out there, it's called Beat Bobby Flay. And you say, what in the world is that? Well, Bobby Flay is a chef who has restaurants around the country, but he's known for a restaurant he has in New York. And I'm going to tell you what, New York has great food. There's no question about it. They may have Menominee beat when it comes to restaurants. Maybe. Oh, that's true. There's some favorites in town. There's some favorites here, I'll tell you. But anyway, Bobby has this restaurant in New York City, and he's gained probably national fame, at least, for being a pretty good cook. And so they had this TV show where people challenge him, cooks from around, the world, around America for sure. They come in and they have their favorite dish. They're going to challenge Bobby to make a rendition of what they make, and then they'll have blind tastings to see who can beat Bobby Flay. Well, when Dana and I have watched this, by far the biggest reason people do not beat Bobby Flay, you want to know what it is? It's flavor, salt. People just they took for granted one item that makes all the difference in the world. I mean, I can't even tell you, Dana and I, it's a joke between us. We watch it and they'll go, there'll be no flavor. No flavor, no salt. They didn't salt brings out the flavor in things. That's what you do. You bring out the flavor in this world. You bring out, heaven's flavor in your situations. Now, let me read this too. In Colossians 4, verse 6, it says, let your speech always be with grace, seasoned with salt, that you may know how to answer each one. What I wanted to say back when Jesus, that's how our life should be. Our words should be seasoned with salt. And again, getting back to just be you. Let your, don't go around trying to be a walking, talking Bible, concordance or something like that, but be you. Let your experience with God, let your experience in the Word, let your experience with your fellowship with Him just naturally come out of you. Because that's what's going to make a difference in people's lives. There's a part here in Jesus' words. He said, you're the salt of the earth, but salt that loses its flavor, how shall it be seasoned? It's good for nothing but to be thrown out and trampled underfoot by men. Let me explain. Anybody want me to explain that a little bit? Because maybe someone's sitting here and they heard that and they say, I don't know if I've been very salty lately. Does that mean I'm going to go to hell? Well, Jesus never said that. He said this, though, that if you keep quiet, the part of your life that God has touched, the part of your life that God has changed, he says you're gonna get run over by the world. You're going to be in this life, and you may die, and you'll go to heaven. But I'm telling you what, you won't ever rise up in this life if you try to keep what God has done in some kind of a box and don't live it out. Do you understand what I'm saying here today? You all with me? Yeah? Hey, cool. All right. Let me just finish by saying this, and I'll have Pastor Stephen come. Did you bring your suitcase in? Oh, yeah. Hey, all right. So, all Jesus is telling you guys is, hey, go out there and be real. Go out there and share the light and share the salt that you are. Make an influence, make an impact in the world around you. Be who God made you to be.
Thank you for listening to Liberty Christian Center's podcast. To partner with this ministry or for any additional information, please visit libertychristiancenter.org.